You're not executive material, Rachel. You never have been. Those words hit me like ice water across my face as I sat in the pristine conference room of Morrison & Associates Marketing, surrounded by glass walls that might as well have been prison bars. My sister Victoria delivered this verdict with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly, her manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table while the rest of the leadership team nodded in agreement. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I was 28 years old, had been working at the company for 6 years, and had just been passed over for the creative director position for the third time. The job went to Marcus Henderson, a smooth-talking graduate from Yale, who'd been there 8 months and whose biggest accomplishment was reorganizing the office supply closet. But here's what they didn't know as they sat there in their designer suits, dismissing me like yesterday's coffee. I was already planning my exit. More than that, I was planning my return. And when I came back, I wouldn't be asking for their approval. I would own it. The Morrison family had always been about appearances. Perfect lawn, perfect house, perfect children performing their perfect roles. Victoria was the golden child from day one, homecoming queen. Valedictorian, full scholarship to Northwestern for her MBA. She had our father's sharp jawline, and our mother's effortless charm, the kind of presence that made a room full of people turn when she walked in. Then there was Rachel Morrison, the younger sister who wore thick glasses until I was 16, who spent weekends reading business journals instead of going to parties, who asked too many questions and smiled too little. While Victoria was dating the quarterback, I was building websites for local businesses out of our garage, charging $50 and learning everything I could about digital marketing. Rachel's always been the worker bee, our father would say at family dinners, cutting into his perfectly grilled steak. Victoria's the natural leader. She has that executive presence. Executive presence. Those two words became the measuring stick for everything in our house. Victoria had it when she convinced our parents to let her have a car at 16. She had it when she negotiated her way out of grounding after throwing a party that resulted in the neighbors calling the cops. She had it when she walked across the graduation stage at Northwestern, already having secured a position at Morrison & Associates, the family marketing firm our grandfather had started in. I graduated from State University with a degree in business administration and a minor in computer science. No fanfare, no celebration dinner, just a quiet congratulations and the assumption that I'd find my own way, which I did, starting in the mailroom at Morrison & Associates, because family business or not, Victoria made it clear I needed to earn my place like everyone else. The company was Victoria's kingdom, and she ruled it with the same effortless authority she'd always possessed. She was 26 when she became senior account manager, 30 when she made partner, and now at 32, she was being groomed to take over when our father retired in 2 years. The trajectory was clear, inevitable, and completely unopposed. Well, almost completely. I spent my first 2 years at Morrison & Associates doing the work no one else wanted to do. Filing, copying, organizing client files, staying late to help with presentations that Victoria would present to clients the next morning. I watched her in those meetings, saw how she commanded the room, how clients hung on her every word. She was brilliant at what she did. I had to give her that. But she was also cruel in ways that only family can be. Rachel, can you grab me a coffee? Make sure it's not too hot this time. Rachel, I need these files reorganized by client value. And try to think strategically about it, not just alphabetically. Rachel, when you're presenting ideas in team meetings, remember that confidence matters more than complexity. Keep it simple. Every interaction was a reminder of the hierarchy, a small paper cut that barely registered individually but collectively left me feeling raw and dismissed. The other employees saw it too. I could see it in their eyes when Victoria would interrupt me mid-sentence during brainstorming sessions, or when she'd redirect my ideas through Marcus or one of the other senior staff members, as if hearing them from me directly somehow diminished their value. But I kept work. I stayed late, arrived early, and took on projects that others considered beneath them. I learned every aspect of the business, not just marketing, but operations, finance, client relations, vendor management. While Victoria was networking at charity galas and industry conferences, I was in the trenches, understanding how the company actually functioned at ground level. The breakthrough moment came during my 4th year, when I identified a major inefficiency in our digital ad spend. We were hemorrhaging money on outdated targeting strategies, and I'd been tracking the data for months. I compiled a comprehensive report showing how we could increase client ROI by 40%, while reducing costs by 25%. It was solid work backed by data with clear implementation strategies. I presented it to Victoria first, thinking she'd appreciate the heads up before I shared it with the broader team. She listened politely, scrolled through my presentation, and then looked up with that expression I knew so well, the one that said she was about to explain something to a child who'd tried their best but still didn't understand how the world worked. "This is interesting work, Rachel, but you're missing the bigger picture. Clients don't just want efficiency. They want to feel like they're working with industry leaders. Our current approach reflects our premium positioning." I tried to explain that the data showed clients were actually losing money with our current approach, that we had a fiduciary responsibility to optimize their campaigns, but she held up her hand. "Rachel, this is exactly what I mean about executive thinking. You're focused on the numbers, but business is about relationships, strategy, vision. You can't just crunch data and expect that to translate into leadership." She never presented my findings to the team. 3 months later, Marcus Henderson presented a similar analysis. Less thorough, with some questionable math, but delivered with the kind of confidence that made the room nod in appreciation. He got a promotion and a corner office. I got a reminder that good work wasn't enough if you didn't have the right packaging. That's when I started looking outside Morrison & Associates for opportunities to grow. Not to leave forever, but to gain the experience and credibility that seemed impossible to achieve under Victoria's shadow. I applied for evening MBA programs, took weekend courses in advanced analytics, earned certifications in digital marketing that put me ahead of anyone else in the company technically. Victoria noticed my extracurricular activities, with the kind of amused tolerance you might show a particularly determined hamster on a wheel. "I admire your dedication, Rachel, but you need to be careful about spreading yourself too thin. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your career is focus on excelling in your current role before trying to leap ahead." The subtext was clear: stay in your lane. But I was already planning my exit from that lane entirely. The final straw came during my 6th year when the creative director position opened up. It was a role I'd been preparing for since day one. I knew our clients better than anyone, had relationships with every vendor, understood both the creative and analytical sides of our campaign. I'd been essentially doing the job for months, covering for our previous creative director during his extended medical leave. I prepared meticulously for the interview. I created a portfolio showcasing campaigns I'd developed, including 3 that had won industry awards despite my name never appearing on the submissions. I prepared a 90-day plan for the department, complete with team restructuring ideas and new client acquisition strategy. I even practiced my presentation with Sarah Chen, one of the junior designers who'd become a close friend and one of the few people who recognized my contributions. The interview was with Victoria, our father, and 2 other partners. I presented for 45 minutes, fielding questions about everything from budget management to creative vision to team leadership. I thought it went well. I thought I'd finally proven myself. 2 days later, Marcus Henderson was announced as the new creative director. I found out the same way everyone else did, through the company-wide email that Victoria sent at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. Subject line: exciting news, leadership transition. I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. Marcus Henderson, who'd been at the company for 8 months, who'd never managed a team larger than his college study group, who'd once asked me to explain the difference between impressions and reach in digital advertising. I walked to Victoria's office, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. She was packing up her briefcase, probably heading to some networking event where she'd celebrate the successful placement of another rising star. "Victoria, can I have a word?" She looked up with that practiced smile that had never quite reached her eyes when directed at me. "Of course, Rachel, but I've got to run soon. Client dinner with the Hartman Group. I wanted to talk about the creative director position." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, right. I meant to speak with you about that. Look, Rachel, you're a valuable member of this team, and your work ethic is really admirable, but leadership roles require a different skill set. What skill set exactly? Executive presence, the ability to inspire confidence in clients and team members. Strategic thinking that goes beyond the tactical level. She paused, studying my face. Rachel, you're incredibly detail-oriented, and that's a strength. But details aren't the same as vision. I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. So you're saying I'm not qualified? I'm saying you're not ready. Maybe in a few years, with the right development and mentoring, you could grow into a leadership role. But right now, honestly, you're not executive material. You never have been. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. She said it kindly, almost gently, the way you might tell a child that they're not tall enough for the roller coaster, as if it were a simple fact of nature rather than a judgment that would define the trajectory of my career. Marcus has been here 8 months. Marcus has an MBA from Yale and 3 years of management experience at his previous firm. Plus, he has that natural leadership quality that you can't really teach. Natural leadership quality, executive presence, the mysterious, indefinable characteristics that seem to exclude me by design. I nodded slowly, feeling pieces of myself rearranging into something harder, more determined. I understand. I hope you do, Rachel. I really do, because you're good at what you do, and there's real value in that. Not everyone needs to be a leader. Some people are meant to be the foundation that leaders build on. I left her office without another word, walked past Marcus's new corner office where he was already hanging his diploma on the wall, and sat in my cubicle staring at my computer screen until the building emptied around me. That night, I went home to my small apartment and opened my laptop. I had been slowly building a digital marketing consultancy on the side, working with small businesses that couldn't afford agencies like Morrison & Associates. It was profitable, growing, but I'd always treated it as a side project. Not anymore. I spent the weekend creating a business plan, not for a small consultancy, but for a full-service marketing agency that would compete directly with Morrison & Associates. I researched funding options, identified potential clients, and started reaching out to talented freelancers who were tired of working for agencies that didn't value their contribution. Within a month, I had secured my first major client, a tech startup that needed comprehensive marketing support. Within 6 months, I had a team of 5 and revenue that exceeded my Morrison & Associates salary. Within a year, I was competing for contracts against my former employer. Victoria noticed, of course. It was hard not to when 3 of Morrison & Associates' smaller clients decided to switch to my agency for better service and lower cost. I heard about your little side business, she said one day when we ran into each other at a Starbucks near the Morrison & Associates office. That's great, Rachel. Really entrepreneurial of you. Her tone was the same one she'd used when I was 12 and announced I was going to be a marine biologist. Indulgent, slightly condescending, certain that this phase would pass. It's not really a side business anymore, I said, meeting her eyes. It's my career, she laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. Well, I hope it works out for you. Just remember, running a small business is very different from managing a real company. If you ever want to come back to Morrison & Associates, I'm sure we could find a place for you. I smiled and thanked her for the offer. But inside, something was crystallizing. A plan was forming that went beyond proving myself or gaining respect. Victoria thought she understood the game we were playing, but she didn't realize that I'd already changed the rule. I wasn't trying to climb the ladder at Morrison & Associates anymore. I was building my own building, and when I was finished, I was going to buy theirs. I resigned from Morrison & Associates on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks after the creative director announcement. No dramatic exit, no burning bridges, just a simple resignation letter delivered to HR with the standard 2 weeks notice. Victoria was in Chicago at a conference, which suited me perfectly. I wanted to disappear quietly, professionally, without giving her the satisfaction of thinking she'd driven me away. My last day was unremarkable. I cleaned out my cubicle, turned in my company laptop, and shook hands with colleagues who promised to stay in touch but probably wouldn't. Sarah Chen was the only one who seemed genuinely sad to see me go. You're making a mistake, she whispered as we hugged goodbye in the lobby. This place won't be the same without you. But I wasn't making a mistake. I was making a calculated move. My agency, Phoenix Marketing Solutions, had been operating out of my spare bedroom for 18 months, but within a week of leaving Morrison & Associates I'd signed a lease on a small office space in the Arts District downtown. Nothing fancy, exposed brick walls, concrete floors, mismatched furniture from estate sales, but it was mine. The nameplate on the door read, Rachel Morrison, CEO, and every time I walked past it, I felt something I'd never experienced at my family's company: ownership. The first 6 months were brutal. I was working 16-hour days, handling everything from client strategy to bookkeeping to emptying the trash. I'd hired 2 junior associates, Emily Rodriguez, a brilliant content strategist who'd been underutilized at a corporate firm, and Jake Sullivan, a data analyst who understood digital advertising metrics better than anyone I'd ever met. We were lean, hungry, and determined to prove that small could be mighty. Our breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company, had fired Morrison & Associates after 6 months of disappointing results. His company made specialized components for renewable energy systems, and Victoria's team had treated them like just another B2B client, using generic strategies that completely missed their unique market position. Richard found us through a referral from one of our smaller clients. He walked into our modest office in his steel-toed boots and work jacket, looking around at our makeshift conference room with undisguised skepticism. "I'll be honest," he said, settling into one of our second-hand chairs. "I'm not sure a startup agency can handle what we need. My last experience with a small firm didn't go well." I spent 3 hours with Richard that day, not pitching him but learning about his business. I toured his facility, talked to his sales team, studied his competitors, and analyzed his customer data. By the end of the week, I developed a comprehensive marketing strategy that positioned Blackwood Industries as the innovative leader in sustainable manufacturing, rather than just another parts supplier. The campaign we created was unlike anything Morrison & Associates would have produced. We developed thought leadership content featuring Richard himself, created technical case studies that spoke directly to his buyers' pain points, and launched a digital strategy that generated qualified leads at 1/3 the cost of his previous campaign. Within 6 months, Blackwood Industries had increased their revenue by 47% and landed 3 major contracts with renewable energy companies on the West Coast. Richard became our biggest advocate, referring us to other manufacturing companies who were tired of being treated like afterthoughts by big agencies that didn't understand their industries. Word spread quickly in the manufacturing sector. These were business owners who valued results over relationships, substance over style. They didn't care about executive presence or Yale MBAs. They cared about return on investment, and we delivered it consistently. By the end of our second year, Phoenix Marketing Solutions had 12 employees and annual revenue of $1.8 million. We'd moved to a larger office in the same building, hired a CFO, and established ourselves as the go-to agency for industrial and manufacturing clients in the region. Victoria, meanwhile, was facing challenges of her own at Morrison & Associates. I learned about their struggles through industry connections and former colleagues who would update me over coffee or lunch. Marcus Henderson, the Golden Boy creative director, had proven to be better at interviews than actual management. 2 senior designers had quit within his first year, citing micromanagement and unclear direction. The creative team was struggling with morale, and several major campaigns had fallen flat. More significantly, Morrison & Associates was losing ground to newer, more agile agencies that understood digital marketing in ways that Victoria's old-school approach couldn't match. Their client base was aging, and they were struggling to attract younger companies that wanted data-driven strategies, rather than relationship-based account management. Our father had postponed his retirement twice, partly because the transition wasn't going as smoothly as planned, and partly because the company's valuation had declined enough to make selling less attractive. Victoria was working longer hours, attending more networking events, and taking on more responsibilities, but the results weren't improving. I knew all of this because I was watching carefully, not out of schadenfreude, but because I was planning something that required perfect timing. During our 3rd year, I started having conversations with private equity firms about growth capital. Phoenix Marketing Solutions had proven its model, established a strong reputation, and built systems that could scale rapidly. We needed funding to expand into new markets and compete for larger contracts. The conversations went better than I'd expected. 3 firms expressed serious interest, particularly after reviewing our financial projections and client retention rate. But as I sat in those glass-walled conference rooms, answering questions about market opportunity and competitive positioning, I realized that taking on investors meant giving up control. It meant answering to people who might not understand our culture or our commitment to treating clients like partners rather than revenue streams. That's when I started exploring a different option entirely. During a routine industry analysis, I discovered that Morrison & Associates was quietly exploring strategic partnerships. Their revenue had declined for 2 consecutive years, they'd lost several major clients to competitors, and the agency landscape was consolidating around larger firms that could offer comprehensive digital capability. My father was now 68 and had been talking publicly about succession planning. Victoria was positioned to take over, but the financial performance wasn't supporting the valuation he needed for his retirement. Industry analysts were speculating about potential acquisitions or merger. I spent months researching the situation, using my network of former colleagues and industry contacts to understand Morrison & Associates' true financial position. What I discovered was that their challenges were deeper than I'd realized. They weren't just losing market share, they were losing relevance. Their client base consisted primarily of established companies in traditional industries, many of whom were reducing marketing spend due to economic pressure. Their digital capabilities were years behind industry standards, and their team lacked the technical expertise to compete for contracts with companies that prioritized data-driven results. Meanwhile, Phoenix Marketing Solutions was experiencing the opposite trajectory. We were attracting younger, growth-oriented companies that appreciated our agile approach and measurable results. Our revenue was growing at 30% annually, our profit margins were strong, and we had a waiting list of potential clients. That's when I started working with investment banker Patricia Kim on a different kind of strategy. Patricia specialized in marketing agency acquisitions and had handled several high-profile deals in our region. When I explained what I wanted to explore, she was initially skeptical. Acquisitions in this space usually flow the other way, she said during our first meeting. Larger agencies acquire smaller ones for their specialized capabilities or client relationships. But what if the smaller agency has better growth prospects and stronger financial performance? She paused, considering the implications. Then you're talking about a very different kind of deal, more aggressive, more personal. Patricia agreed to conduct a preliminary analysis of Morrison & Associates' financial position and market valuation. What she found confirmed my suspicions. The company was worth significantly less than my father believed, and significantly less than it had been worth 5 years earlier. They're in a vulnerable position, Patricia explained during our follow-up meeting. Revenue decline, client churn and leadership transition challenges have created an opportunity for the right buyer. Someone with strategic vision and adequate capital could acquire them at a considerable discount to historical valuation. I asked her to put together a comprehensive acquisition analysis, including financing options and integration strategies. The numbers were striking. Phoenix Marketing Solutions, with the right backing, could acquire Morrison & Associates for roughly 2 points. The financing would require a combination of investor capital, bank loans, and seller financing, but it was achievable. More importantly, the combined entity would create a marketing powerhouse with complementary capabilities and a diversified client base worth over $15 million annually. But this wasn't just about business strategy. This was about proving that the sister they'd dismissed as not executive material could outmaneuver them in the most fundamental way possible. I spent 6 months putting together the acquisition financing, working with 3 investment partners who understood both the financial opportunity and the strategic vision. We structured the deal as a leveraged buyout, with Phoenix Marketing Solutions as the acquiring entity and me maintaining majority control of the combined company. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The family business that had rejected me for lacking executive presence was about to be acquired by the executive I'd become after they forced me to prove myself elsewhere. Victoria had no idea what was coming. She was too busy trying to solve Morrison & Associates' problems from the inside, attending industry conferences and networking events, searching for the magic bullet that would restore the company's growth trajectory. She didn't realize that the solution to their problems was sitting across town in an office building she'd probably never noticed, planning a transaction that would make everything they'd dismissed about me irrelevant. By our fourth year, Phoenix Marketing Solutions had 22 employees and annual revenue of $3.2 million. We'd established satellite offices in 2 other cities and were competing successfully against agencies 5 times our size. Our client satisfaction scores were industry-leading, our employee retention was exceptional, and our financial performance was the envy of our competitors. Meanwhile, Morrison & Associates had announced another leadership restructuring. Marcus Henderson had been promoted to a strategic planning role that everyone understood was a face-saving way to remove him from day-to-day operations. Victoria was now officially the president and CEO-elect, but the company's challenges hadn't improved under her expanded authority. The timing was perfect. Morrison & Associates was weak enough to be acquired but still valuable enough to make the transaction worthwhile. My father was motivated to sell. Victoria was focused on operational improvements rather than strategic threats, and the market conditions favored buyers with strong cash positions. I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Kim for a Friday afternoon in December. We'd been working together for 8 months, and she'd assembled everything needed to move forward with the acquisition. "Are you ready to make this official?" she asked as we reviewed the final financing documents. I looked out her office window at the city skyline, thinking about the cubicle where I'd spent 6 years being systematically dismissed, the conferences where Victoria had introduced me as my sister who helps with the administrative side of things, and the resignation letter I'd delivered with no fanfare or explanation. They'd never seen me coming because they'd never bothered to look. "Yes," I said, signing the engagement letter that would set everything in motion. "Let's buy Morrison & Associates." The call came on a Wednesday morning in March, exactly 18 months after I'd signed the engagement letter with Patricia Kim. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Rachel, there's someone on line 3 who says it's urgent." Won't give his name, but he mentioned Morrison & Associates. I picked up the phone to hear a familiar voice, David Chen, Sarah's older brother who worked in accounting at Morrison & Associates. We'd met a few times at industry events, and Sarah had mentioned he was growing increasingly concerned about the company's financial direction. "Rachel, I'm sorry to call you at work, but I didn't know who else to reach out to. Sarah mentioned you two stayed in touch after you left." His voice was strained, nervous. "I probably shouldn't be making this call, but things are getting bad here. Really bad. I thought you should know, especially since you still have friends in the company." "What's happening, David?" "We're looking at potential layoffs. Major one." Victoria called an all-hands meeting for Friday to discuss restructuring for future growth, but the rumors are that we're cutting 30% of staff, maybe more. I felt my pulse quicken but kept my voice steady. "How long has this been building?" "Months. We lost the Hartman Group contract in January. That was 15% of our annual revenue right there. Then Peterson Industries decided not to renew. Victoria's been scrambling to replace the business, but the new clients we're landing are smaller accounts with lower margin." David paused, and I could hear voices in the background. "Look, I need to go, but Sarah asked me to call you. She's worried about her job, and honestly, so am I. This place has been my whole career. 15 years, Rachel. I don't know what I'll do if they let me go." After hanging up, I sat in my office processing the information. The timeline was accelerating faster than I'd anticipated. Morrison & Associates was in more serious trouble than our financial analysis had indicated, which meant their asking price would continue to drop, but it also meant we needed to move quickly before the company's value deteriorated beyond recovery. I called Patricia Kim immediately. "The situation at Morrison & Associates is more urgent than we thought," I explained, filling her in on David's call. "If they're announcing major layoffs this week, it means they're in immediate financial distress. That changes our strategy significantly," Patricia said. "If they're desperate, we might be able to negotiate much more favorable terms, but we also risk the company losing key talent and client relationships before we can complete the acquisition." "How quickly can we move, with the financing already in place?" "We could have an offer ready by early next week. But Rachel, you need to understand what you're walking into. If they're cutting 30% of staff, that means the company culture is already fractured. Integration is going to be complicated." I'm not worried about integration, I said. I'm worried about timing. That evening, I drove past the Morrison & Associates building for the first time in over 4 years. The parking lot was nearly empty at 7 p.m., which wasn't unusual, but the building itself looked different somehow, smaller than I remembered, less impressive. The landscape needed attention, and several of the exterior lights were burned out. I sat in my car across the street, watching the few remaining office windows glow against the twilight, and thought about all the nights I'd stayed late in that building, working on projects that Victoria would present the next morning. The irony was almost too perfect. The company that had dismissed me was about to become mine through the same relentless work ethic they'd never valued. Friday morning, I positioned myself at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Morrison & Associates, waiting for Sarah Chen to text me after the all-hands meeting. The Phoenix Marketing Solutions team thought I was conducting a client site visit, which wasn't entirely untrue. I was researching a potential acquisition target. The text came at 10:47 a.m. Worse than expected, 40% layoffs effective immediately. Victoria broke down during the announcement. Half the creative team is gone, including Jake Morrison from accounting. People are packing up now. It's chaos. 40%. That was devastating, but it also meant Morrison & Associates was essentially declaring bankruptcy without filing the paperwork. Any acquisition offer we made now would be seen as a lifeline rather than a hostile takeover. I called Patricia immediately. We need to accelerate everything. Can you reach out to their legal counsel today? I can try, but Rachel, you should know that news like this travels fast in our industry. If other agencies sense weakness, you might face competing offers. No one else has been preparing for this opportunity for 5 years, I said. Trust me, we're ahead of everyone else. That afternoon, Patricia managed to connect with Morrison & Associates attorney Michael Reynolds, who confirmed that the company was actively seeking strategic partnerships or acquisition opportunity. Victoria had authorized him to entertain serious offers, and my father was prepared to consider any proposal that would preserve jobs and maintain the company's legacy. They want to meet Monday morning, Patricia reported back. Victoria Morrison specifically asked that any potential buyers present a comprehensive integration plan that addresses employee retention and client transition. She's trying to protect the people who are left. For the first time since this process began, I felt something that might have been admiration for my sister. Even facing the collapse of everything she'd worked toward, she was trying to take care of her team. It was exactly the kind of leadership instinct that had made her so effective, and exactly the kind of compassion that would make the next phase of my plan more complicated. Over the weekend, I worked with my Phoenix Marketing Solutions leadership team to develop the integration strategy Victoria had requested. Emily Rodriguez would oversee the creative department merger, combining the best talent from both agencies. Jake Sullivan would lead the technology integration, upgrading Morrison & Associates' digital capabilities to match our standards. Our CFO would handle the financial consolidation and develop retention packages for key employees. The plan was comprehensive, generous, and strategically brilliant. We would preserve most of the remaining Morrison & Associates jobs, while eliminating redundancies, increase compensation for top performers, and invest in technology upgrades that would make the combined agency more competitive. Clients would benefit from expanded capabilities and improved service delivery. On paper, it looked like a rescue operation designed to save a struggling company and its employees. In reality, it was the culmination of a 5-year strategy to prove that the daughter they'd dismissed could outmaneuver them completely. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of March weather that couldn't decide between winter and spring. I dressed carefully, navy blue suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that was professional but not aggressive. I wanted to look like a serious business executive, not like someone settling a personal score. Patricia met me in the lobby of Morrison & Associates at exactly 9. The receptionist, someone I didn't recognize, directed us to conference room B, the same room where I'd been told I wasn't executive material 4.5 years earlier. Victoria was already there when we arrived, along with my father, Michael Reynolds, and someone I didn't recognize, who turned out to be their financial advisor. Victoria looked tired, older than her 36 years, with the kind of stress lines that come from carrying more responsibility than one person can handle. She looked up when we entered, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been Rachel, she said, half standing from her chair. What are you doing here? Victoria, I said calmly, extending my hand. Thank you for taking this meeting. I'd like to introduce Patricia Kim, from KLM Investment Banking. We're here to discuss Phoenix Marketing Solutions' acquisition proposal for Morrison & Associates. The silence in the room was absolute. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. My father leaned back in his chair as if he'd been physically pushed. Michael Reynolds looked back and forth between Victoria and me like he was watching a tennis match. I'm sorry, Victoria said slowly. Did you say acquisition proposal? Patricia opened her briefcase and began distributing copies of our proposal. Phoenix Marketing Solutions has prepared a comprehensive offer to acquire Morrison & Associates, including a detailed integration plan that addresses employee retention, client transition, and operational improvement. The proposal includes immediate capital injection to stabilize operations and fund growth initiatives. Victoria stared at the document in front of her without opening it. Rachel, I don't understand. You run a small consulting firm. How could you possibly? Phoenix Marketing Solutions generated $4.2 million in revenue last year, I said, settling into my chair. We have 28 employees, satellite offices in 3 cities, and a client retention rate of 93%. We're not a small consulting firm anymore, Victoria. We're your competition. My father finally spoke, his voice careful and measured. Rachel, this is unexpected. When did I do what, Dad? When did I build a successful company? When did I develop the financial resources to acquire Morrison & Associates? When did I become the kind of executive you said I'd never be? I opened my copy of the proposal and slid it across the table toward him. The answer is gradually, then suddenly, just like any business success story. Victoria picked up the proposal with shaking hands and began reading. I watched her face as she processed the numbers, the purchase price, the financing structure, the integration timeline. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror, as she realized this wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding. This is real, she whispered. Completely real, Patricia confirmed. The financing is already secured, pending due diligence and final negotiations. Phoenix Marketing Solutions is prepared to move forward immediately. But why? Victoria looked directly at me for the first time since we'd entered the room. Why would you want to buy us? We're struggling right now. Our client base isn't what it used to be. Our systems need updating. We just laid off 40% of our staff. I know exactly what Morrison & Associates is worth, I said. I also know what it could be worth with proper management and strategic investment. This isn't charity, Victoria. It's business. Michael Reynolds cleared his throat. Morrison, could you give us a few minutes to review this proposal? The terms are quite generous, but we need to understand the full implications. Of course, I said, standing. Patricia and I will wait in the lobby. Take all the time you need. As we walked toward the door, I heard Victoria say in a voice barely above a whisper, "She's going to fire me, isn't she?" I paused at the doorway and turned back. Victoria, I'm going to do what's best for the company. That's what executives do. In the lobby, Patricia and I sat in the same chairs where I used to wait for job interviews 6 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was back in the same building, but everything else had changed completely. How do you feel? Patricia asked quietly. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, I said. 30 minutes later, Michael Reynolds appeared and asked us to return to the conference room. Victoria was staring out the window at the parking lot, her shoulders rigid with tension. My father was reviewing the financial projections with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. We have some questions, Michael began, but first, I want to confirm that this is a serious offer backed by legitimate financing. Completely serious, Patricia replied. We can provide verification of funds and financing commitments within 24 hours. And the integration plan, Victoria said without turning from the window. You're proposing to retain most of the current staff. The staff that adds value to the combined organization. There will be some redundancies, obviously, but our goal is to preserve jobs while improving performance. Victoria finally turned around. And management? What happens to the current leadership structure? I met her eyes direct. That depends on whether the current leadership is prepared to adapt to new standards of performance and accountability. The room fell silent again. Everyone understood what I was really saying. Victoria's reign as the heir apparent was over. The company she'd expected to inherit was about to belong to the sister she'd spent her entire career dismissing. "We need time to consider this," my father said finally. "It's a significant decision with long-term implications." "I understand," I said. But I should mention that this offer has a time limit. Given Morrison and Associates' current financial position, we need a decision by Friday. After that, the terms will need to be renegotiated, based on any further deterioration in the company's value." As Patricia and I packed up our materials, Victoria spoke one more time. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Is this about revenge? Is this your way of getting back at us for how things went when you worked here?" I considered the question carefully, looking around the conference room where I'd spent so many hours being overlooked and undervalued. "No, Victoria," I said finally. "This is about opportunity. Morrison and Associates is a valuable company that's been poorly managed. I have the resources and expertise to fix it. If you want to call that revenge, that's your choice. I call it business." As we walked toward the lobby, I could hear urgent whispers behind us. Victoria, my father and their advisors were already deep in crisis mode, trying to process the impossible situation they found themselves in. The daughter they'd dismissed as not executive material had just offered to buy their company, and they were desperate enough that they might have to say yes. Friday came faster than Victoria expected, and slower than I hoped. The silence from Morrison and Associates had been deafening all week. No calls, no emails, no requests for clarification or additional information. Patricia assured me this was normal for acquisition negotiations, but I knew my family well enough to recognize the sound of panic, disguised as deliberation. At 2 p.m., exactly as our proposal stipulated, my phone rang. Michael Reynolds, their attorney, asking if Patricia and I could meet at 4 and discuss their decision. His tone was carefully neutral, professional, but I caught something underneath. Resignation, maybe, or "They're going to accept," I told Patricia as we walked into the Morrison and Associates building for the second time that week. "The question is whether they'll try to negotiate better terms, or just surrender completely." The lobby felt different this time, smaller, less intimidating. The receptionist was someone new again, probably a temp hired after the layoffs. Even the building directory looked sparse, with several company names removed from the board. This time, they'd reserved the main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, where Victoria used to conduct her most important client presentations. As we entered, I noticed they'd arranged the seating differently. Instead of sitting across from each other like adversaries, they'd positioned chairs around the table in a more collaborative configuration. Everyone was already there. Victoria, my father, Michael Reynolds, their financial advisor, and surprisingly, Marcus Henderson. Seeing Marcus was unexpected. He'd been marginalized since his creative director role had been restructured, and I hadn't anticipated Victoria including him in ownership decisions. Victoria stood when we entered, extending her hand with a smile that didn't reach her eye. "Rachel, Patricia, thank you for coming back. Please have a seat." She was dressed impeccably as always. Charcoal gray suit, pearl earrings, hair styled in the kind of effortless updo that probably took an hour to but I could see the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her voice that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Before we discuss your proposal," Victoria began, settling into her chair, "I want to acknowledge something. When you left Morrison and Associates 4 years ago, I didn't fully appreciate the scope of your contributions to this company. I've spent this week reviewing your project files, and I realize now that we undervalued your strategic thinking and technical I nodded politely but said nothing. This felt like the beginning of a negotiation rather than an acceptance. "That said," she continued, "I think there might be a better arrangement than the acquisition structure you've proposed. Something that could benefit both companies without the complexity of a full buyout." Patricia and I exchanged glances. This wasn't what we'd expected. What did you have in mind? Patricia asked. My father leaned forward, speaking for the first time. A merger. Equal partner. Morrison and Associates brings 60 years of established relationships and industry credibility. Phoenix Marketing Solutions brings digital expertise and growth momentum. Together, we'd be stronger than either company alone. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They were trying to reframe the conversation, to position themselves as equals, rather than a distressed company facing acquisition. That's an interesting perspective, I said carefully, but I'm not sure the numbers support an equal partnership. Morrison and Associates revenue has declined 38% over 2 years. You've just eliminated 40% of your workforce. Your client retention rate is 67% compared to our 93%. Marcus Henderson spoke up, his voice carrying the same confident tone I remembered from creative director meetings. But Rachel, you're thinking about this too narrow. Morrison and Associates has name recognition, established vendor relationships, and client contracts that Phoenix Marketing Solutions couldn't access independently. This isn't just about current revenue, it's about combined potential. I studied Marcus for a moment, impressed despite myself. He'd clearly been coached, but his analysis wasn't wrong. Morrison and Associates did have assets that would be valuable to Phoenix Marketing Solutions, even in their weakened state. What specifically are you proposing? Patricia asked. Victoria opened a folder and distributed copies of their counter-proposal, joint ownership structure, with shared decision-making authority. You'd be CEO of the combined entity. Rachel, we recognize that Phoenix Marketing Solutions is the stronger company operation, but I'd serve as president, overseeing client relationships and strategic partnerships. I scanned the document quickly. They were offering me operational control while retaining significant equity and decision-making power. It was cleverly structured. They'd acknowledge my success while preserving their dignity and financial interests. This is generous, I said, setting the document aside, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Morrison and Associates isn't looking for a partner, you're looking for a buyer. Your current financial position doesn't support an equal merger. The room went quiet. Victoria's carefully constructed smile faltered slightly. Rachel, my father said, his voice carrying the same paternal authority he'd used when I was 12 years old. I think you're being unnecessarily aggressive. This is a family business. We can find a solution that works for everyone. That's when something inside me snapped. A family business. I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the conference table. Dad, this stopped being about family the moment Victoria told me I wasn't executive material. This became about business the moment you promoted Marcus over me, despite his having 8 months of experience to my 6 years. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. You're sitting here trying to negotiate, because you have no other choice. Morrison and Associates is failing, your client base is shrinking, your team is demoralized, and your financial position is deteriorating every month. I'm not here to rescue you. I'm here to acquire an underperforming asset at a fair market price. Victoria's face flushed. Rachel, I'm being what, Victoria? Dramatic, ungrateful, not family-oriented enough. I sat back down, my voice calm but sharp. Or am I being executive material? The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My father stared at his hands. Patricia watched the exchange with professional detachment, probably taking mental notes for her post-meeting debrief. Victoria recovered first, straightening her shoulders and meeting my gaze directly. Fine. Let's talk numbers. What exactly are you offering? Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out the updated financial analysis we'd prepared. Based on Morrison and Associates' current performance and market position, Phoenix Marketing Solutions is prepared to offer $2.8 million for complete acquisition of all assets, client contracts, and intellectual property. My father's eyebrows shot up. That's significantly below our book value. Your book value is based on historical performance that's no longer relevant, I said. The offer reflects current market conditions and realistic future projections. What about existing contracts and client relationships? Victoria asked. Those would transfer to Phoenix Marketing Solutions, subject to client approval. We'd honor all existing agreements and provide seamless transition support. And staff retention. I pulled out another document. The integration plan we'd refined since Monday's meeting. 73% of current Morrison & Associates employees would be offered positions with the combined company, compensation packages would be competitive with industry standards, and key personnel would receive retention bonuses. Victoria studied the staffing plan carefully. What about management positions? Management positions would be determined based on performance, expertise, and cultural fit with Phoenix Marketing Solutions operational standards. She looked up sharply, meaning that previous titles and organizational hierarchies wouldn't automatically transfer. Everyone would be evaluated on their ability to contribute to the combined company's success. Marcus leaned forward, including Victoria. I turned to look at my sister, who was gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Including Victoria. The weight of that statement settled over the room like fog. Victoria would go from being the heir apparent of a family business to being an employee of a company owned by the sister she'd spent her career dismissing. This is vindictive, Victoria said quietly. No, I replied. This is business. Vindictive would be offering nothing, and watching Morrison & Associates declare bankruptcy. Business is offering fair value for a distressed asset, and providing employment opportunities for displaced workers. My father rubbed his temples, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Rachel, surely we can find some middle ground, some arrangement that preserves the family legacy while addressing the financial challenges. The family legacy. I laughed, but there was no humor in. Dad, the family legacy is a company that's lost 38% of its revenue in 2 years because it couldn't adapt to market changes. The family legacy is promoting unqualified people based on relationships, rather than perform. The family legacy is telling your daughter she's not executive material while she's building a competitor that's now in a position to acquire you. I stood again, gathering my materials. Patricia and I will give you 15 minutes to discuss this privately. When we come back, I need a yes or no answer. The offer expires at close of business today, and it won't be extended. As we walked toward the lobby, I could hear urgent whispers behind us, Victoria's voice tight with stress, my father's deeper tones, probably trying to find some face-saving compromise, Marcus saying something about strategic alternatives and market timing. How do you feel? Patricia asked, as we settled into the lobby chairs. Like I'm watching the final scene of a very long play. 12 minutes later, Michael Reynolds appeared and gestured for us to return to the conference room. The mood had shifted dramatically. Victoria was staring out the window again, her shoulders rigid. My father looked defeated. Marcus was taking notes on a legal pad, probably documenting the meeting for his own protection. We accept your offer, Victoria said without turning around. Patricia pulled out the preliminary purchase agreement. Excellent. We can begin due diligence immediately and target closing within 60 days. I have one condition, Victoria said, finally turning to face me. I want to personally handle the client transition meetings. These are relationships I've built over 10 years. I owe it to our clients to explain the situation directly. I considered this carefully. Victoria's client relationships were one of Morrison & Associates' few remaining assets, and her involvement in the transition would likely improve retention rate. Agreed, I said, as long as the messaging is consistent with Phoenix Marketing Solutions' communication strategy, which is that this acquisition represents an opportunity for clients to access expanded capabilities and improved service delivery. Morrison & Associates clients will benefit from Phoenix Marketing Solutions' digital expertise and data-driven approach. Victoria nodded slowly. And what about staff announcements? How do we explain this to the people who are left? Honestly, Morrison & Associates was facing financial challenges that threatened job security. Phoenix Marketing Solutions is providing stability and growth opportunities. Some positions will be eliminated due to redundancies, but most employees will have better career prospects with the combined company. My father signed the preliminary agreement with a shaking hand. As he passed the document back to Patricia, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm proud of you, Rachel, he said quietly. I may not like how this happened, but I'm proud of what you've built. For a moment, I felt something that might have been forgiveness stirring in my chest, but then I remembered 6 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and told I wasn't good enough. Thank you, I said simply. As Patricia and I prepared to leave, Victoria approached me one final time. Rachel, I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know that I recognize what I missed. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for, more strategic, more determined. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. For the first time in years, she seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of losing everything she'd expected to inherit. Victoria, I said gently, I hope you'll consider staying with the company, not because of family obligation, but because you're good at what you do. The combined organization will need experienced client relationship managers. Her eyes filled with tears she was too proud to let fall. As your employee, as a valued member of the team, I walked out of Morrison & Associates that day as its new owner, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something more complex, satisfied, maybe, or complete. The circle that had started with being told I wasn't executive material was finally closed. The girl who'd been dismissed for lacking leadership presence had just acquired the company that dismissed her. That was executive material enough. The news broke on Monday morning before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Phoenix Marketing Solutions acquires Morrison & Associates in strategic expansion move, appeared in the Business Journal's morning briefing, followed within hours by coverage in 3 other local publications and a mention in Advertising Age's weekly roundup. The phone in my office started ringing at 7:30 a.m., and didn't stop until I finally asked my assistant to hold all non-urgent calls after lunch. Industry colleagues, former Morrison & Associates employees, potential clients, and journalists all wanted the inside story of how a 4-year-old agency had acquired a 60-year-old family business. What they didn't know, what none of the coverage mentioned, was that the acquisition was more than a business transaction. It was the completion of a 5-year transformation from dismissed daughter to company owner, and the industry was struggling to understand how they'd missed the story entirely. The first call that mattered came from Sarah Chen at 8:15 a.m. Rachel, oh my God, I can't believe it. When David told me you were interested in the company, I never imagined you bought the whole thing. I could hear the amazement in her voice, mixed with something that sounded like relief. Sarah had survived the layoffs, but was working in a completely demoralized environment, watching colleagues pack up their desks while Victoria tried to maintain normalcy during the transition period. I did, I said simply, and Sarah, I want you to know that your position is secure. In fact, I'd like to discuss expanding your role in the new organization. Really? Because honestly, Rachel, it's been terrifying here. Nobody knows what's happening. Victoria's been in meetings constantly, and Marcus just announced he's taking a position with Harrison Creative. Everyone's updating their resumes. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. The period between announcement and closing was crucial for employee retention, and uncertainty was driving away exactly the talent we needed to preserve. Can you come in this afternoon? I want to start having conversations with key team members about their future with the combined company. The acquisition wouldn't officially close for 6 weeks, but I'd negotiated the right to begin integration planning immediately. That afternoon, I scheduled meetings with 8 Morrison & Associates employees, whose skills and experience would be crucial for the transition. Sarah was first, arriving at my Phoenix Marketing Solutions office with a portfolio of her recent work and visible nervousness. She looked around at our open plan workspace, the collaborative meeting areas, the wall of industry awards, and I could see her processing the contrast with Morrison & Associates' more traditional corporate environment. Sarah, I want to offer you the position of creative director for the combined organization, I said after we'd settled in my office. Your portfolio speaks for itself, and I know you have the leadership capabilities to manage an integrated creative team. Her mouth fell open. Creative director. But Rachel, I've never managed more than 2 people at once. I don't have an MBA. I'm not sure I'm qualified for. You're qualified, I interrupted gently. You understand our clients, you produce excellent work, and more importantly, you care about the people on your team. Those are the qualifications that matter. It was the same conversation I'd wished someone had with me 6 years earlier, and watching Sarah's face transform from uncertainty to excitement reminded me why this acquisition was about more than personal vindication. The other meetings went similarly. Jennifer Walsh from Account Management, promoted to Senior Vice President of Client Services, Thomas Rivera from the digital team,
elevated to Director of Technology Integration. Each conversation was an opportunity to show Morrison and Associates employees that the acquisition represented growth, rather than downsizing, advancement rather than displacement. By Wednesday, word had spread through both companies about the promotion meeting. The mood at Morrison and Associates shifted from panic to cautious optimism, as employees realized that Phoenix Marketing Solutions was serious about retaining talent and investing in growth. Victoria, meanwhile, was handling the transition with professional grace that surprised me. She'd accepted my offer to stay with the company as Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, a role that would leverage her client relationships while acknowledging the new organizational hierarchy. It couldn't have been easy for her, but she was managing the situation with more dignity than I'd expected. The real test came Thursday morning when we held the first joint staff meeting between both companies. I'd rented a conference room at the downtown Marriott to neutral territory that didn't favor either organization. 43 people attended, the remaining Morrison and Associates staff and the entire Phoenix Marketing Solutions team. I stood at the front of the room, looking at faces that ranged from excited to skeptical to quietly terrified. These were people whose careers had been disrupted by circumstances beyond their control, and they deserved honesty about what came next. 6 weeks from today, Morrison and Associates and Phoenix Marketing Solutions will officially become one company, I began. For some of you, this represents uncertainty about your future. For others, it represents new opportunities for growth. For all of us, it represents a chance to build something stronger than either company could achieve independently. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, a side-by-side comparison of both companies' client portfolios, capabilities and market position. Morrison and Associates brings 60 years of industry relationships, established processes and deep expertise in traditional marketing channels. Phoenix Marketing Solutions brings digital innovation, data analytics capabilities and agile project management. Separately, we're competing for the same clients. Together we can offer comprehensive solutions that neither company could deliver alone. The questions started immediately: concerns about job security, reporting structures, office locations, compensation changes, and cultural integration. I answered each one directly, without corporate jargon or evasive promises. Will there be additional layoffs? Asked someone from the Morrison and Associates finance team. No, I said. We've already identified redundancies and built them into our integration plan. If you're in this room today, you have a position with the new organization. What about the Morrison and Associates brand? Asked another voice. Will that continue to exist? The Morrison and Associates name will be preserved for specific client relationships where that continuity matters, but our primary brand moving forward will be Phoenix Marketing Solutions, reflecting our focus on growth and transformation. Victoria sat in the third row, taking notes and occasionally nodding when I addressed concerns about client transition. At one point she raised her hand. Rachel, can you talk about leadership structure? How will decision-making work in the combined organization? It was a fair question, and probably one that several people were wondering about but afraid to ask. I'll serve as CEO with ultimate authority over strategic direction and operational decisions, I said. Victoria will lead our strategic partnerships division, managing key client relationships and new business development. Department heads will have autonomy within their areas of expertise, but major decisions will flow through the executive team. After the meeting, Victoria approached me as employees filed out, many of them chatting with their new colleagues from the other company. That went well, she said. Better than I expected. Honestly, people seem more optimistic than they were a week ago. The unknown is always scarier than reality, I said. Once people understand what's actually happening, they can start planning for their future instead of worrying about it. Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching the last few employees leave the conference room. Rachel, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When you were planning this acquisition, were you thinking about what it would mean for having to work for your company after everything that happened between us? I considered the question carefully. I was thinking about what it would mean for Morrison and Associates, what it would mean for the employees whose jobs were at risk, what it would mean for the clients who needed better service than they were getting.
But not about me specifically? Not specifically, no. This wasn't about you, Victoria. It was about building something better. She nodded slowly. I think that's what I needed to hear. That this was business, not personal revenge. It was business, I confirmed, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't personal satisfaction in proving that the sister you called not executive material could make better strategic decisions than the executives who dismissed her. The following week brought a different kind of challenge: media attention. The Business Journal wanted to do a feature story about the acquisition, focusing on the David and Goliath angle of a small agency acquiring an established competitor. Forbes picked up the story for their online edition, and suddenly I was fielding interview requests from journalists who wanted to understand how Phoenix Marketing Solutions had pulled off such an unexpected move. The interviews were surreal. Reporters asking about my background, my business philosophy, my plans for the combined company. Questions about being a young female CEO in a male-dominated industry. Speculation about whether this acquisition would lead to additional consolidation in the regional marketing space. What none of them knew was the family connection. Victoria and I had agreed to keep that detail private, presenting the acquisition as a straightforward business transaction rather than a family drama. It was better for both companies' reputations, and it allowed us to focus on the integration rather than fielding questions about sibling rivalry and corporate succession. But the industry buzz was unmistakable. Phoenix Marketing Solutions had gone from being a respected but small agency to being a major player in the regional market overnight. New business inquiries increased by 300% in 2 weeks. Recruiting became significantly easier, as top talent from other agencies expressed interest in joining our growing team. The real validation came from an unexpected source. Competitors who'd never taken Phoenix Marketing Solutions seriously were suddenly treating us as equal. Invitation to industry roundtables, inclusion in major RFP processes, recognition at trade association events. The acquisition had given us instant credibility that would have taken years to build organically. 3 weeks after the announcement, I received a call that changed everything again. Ms. Morrison, this is Catherine Liu from Meridian Capital Partners. We're a private equity firm focused on marketing and communications acquisitions. We've been following your recent transaction with great interest. Catherine explained that Meridian had been tracking consolidation opportunities in the marketing services space and was impressed by Phoenix Marketing Solutions' strategic approach to the Morrison & Associates acquisition. We'd like to discuss potential partnership opportunities, she said. Specifically, we're interested in providing growth capital for additional acquisitions in your market. Additional acquisition. With private equity backing, Phoenix Marketing Solutions could become a regional consolidator, acquiring other underperforming agencies and building a marketing services powerhouse. I'd be interested in hearing more. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, but I couldn't stop thinking about the implications. 5 years ago, I'd been told I wasn't executive material by a company that was now struggling to survive. Today, private equity firms were calling me about building a multi-agency platform. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. That evening, I sat in my office after everyone else had gone home, looking at the city lights through the windows and thinking about the phone call that had started this whole journey. David Chen's worried voice telling me about impending layoffs at Morrison & Associates. In 6 weeks, those layoffs would be reversed. The people who'd lost their jobs would be rehired into an organization with better growth prospects and more stable leadership. The company that had dismissed me would become the foundation for something larger and more successful than anyone had imagined. Victoria would adapt to being an employee rather than an heir apparent, but she'd do it with dignity and skill. My father would see his life's work preserved and expanded under new management. The family business would survive, transformed into something stronger than it had ever been under family control. And I would have proven that executive material isn't something you're born with or recognized for. It's something you build, one decision at a time, until the world has no choice but to acknowledge what you've become. The phone rang one more time that day. Victoria calling from her car. Rachel, I just wanted to thank you for how you've handled this transition. I know it could have gone very differently. Victoria, we're going to build something great together. That's all that matters now. After hanging up, I realized she was right. It could have gone very differently. I could have let Morrison & Associates fail completely, watching from a distance as they lost everything. I could have used the acquisition to humiliate rather than integrate, to prove my superiority rather than build something better. Instead, I'd chosen to create value rather than destroy it, to build rather than tear down. To prove that true executive material isn't about power over others, it's about the power to create something bigger than yourself. And that, I thought as I finally turned off the lights and headed home, was worth more than any revenge could ever be. The closing day arrived on a crisp Friday morning in May, exactly 8 weeks after that first meeting in Conference Room B. I sat in the offices of Patterson, Wells and Associates, the law firm handling the transaction, surrounded by documents that would officially transfer ownership of Morrison and Associates to Phoenix Marketing Solutions. Patricia Kim was there, along with our attorney James Walsh, the bank representatives handling our acquisition financing, and accountants from both companies. Across the conference table sat Victoria, my father, Michael Reynolds, and their financial advisor, the same players who'd been in that first dramatic meeting, but the energy was completely different now. Where there had been desperation and shock 8 weeks earlier, there was now resignation mixed with something that might have been relief. Victoria looked rested for the first time in months. My father seemed smaller than I remembered, but also more peaceful, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years was finally being lifted. The document signing took 47 minutes. Each signature transferred another piece of Morrison and Associates' legacy from the family that had built it to the daughter they'd never expected to lead it. Patent transfers, client contract assignments, employee agreements, asset purchases, intellectual property rights, 60 years of accumulated business value changing hands with the stroke of a pen. When it was finished, James Walsh shook my hand formally. "Congratulations, Ms. Morrison. You're now the owner of Morrison and Associates Marketing." I looked across the table at my father, who was staring at his hands, probably processing the fact that his life's work no longer belonged to him. "Dad," I said quietly, "thank you for building something worth preserving." He looked up, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of the father who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with math homework, who'd been proud of my science fair ribbons, even when no one else was watching. "I hope you'll make it better than I ever could," he said. The reception afterward was held at the country club, where Morrison and Associates had hosted their annual client appreciation dinners for the past 15 years. It seemed appropriate somehow, celebrating the transition in the same venue where Victoria had given dozens of speeches about the company's bright future. The guest list was carefully curated: key employees from both companies, major clients, industry partners, and local business leaders who'd been following the acquisition story. I'd invited Catherine Liu from Meridian Capital Partners, who'd flown in from Chicago specifically for the event. The private equity partnership discussions had been progressing rapidly, and today felt like the right time to introduce her to our expanded team. I spent the first hour moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about integration plans. The conversations were different from anything I'd experienced before, people speaking to me as an equal, as someone whose opinion mattered, as a leader worth knowing. "Rachel, this is absolutely remarkable," said David Peterson from Peterson Industries, one of the clients Morrison and Associates had lost during their financial struggle. "I have to admit, when we decided not to renew with Morrison and Associates, I never imagined they'd be acquired by an agency with your digital capabilities. We should talk about working together again." That conversation was repeated a dozen times throughout the evening. Clients who'd left Morrison and Associates, expressing interest in working with the combined organization. Vendors want to understand our new procurement processes. Competitors offering respectful congratulations while clearly trying to assess whether we posed a threat to their own market position. The moment that mattered most came when Sarah Chen approached me near the end of the evening, a glass of champagne in her hand and a smile I hadn't seen since before the layoffs. "Rachel, I wanted to thank you for believing in me. The creative director promotion has been incredible, but more than that, you've shown me what leadership actually looks like." "What do you mean?" When Victoria was in charge, leadership meant having the right connections, the right education, the right presentation style. But watching you these past 2 months, I've realized that real leadership is about making decisions that help other people succeed, about building something bigger than your own ego. Sarah paused, looking around the room at the celebration. You could have destroyed Morrison and Associates. You could have let them fail and then hired their best people. Instead, you found a way to save the company and the jobs, and make everything stronger. That's not just good business, that's character. I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that the validation I'd been seeking wasn't about proving Victoria wrong or showing my father what he'd missed. It was about becoming the kind of leader I'd wished I'd had when I was struggling to find my place in the business world. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Victoria approached me on the terrace overlooking the golf course. The spring air was cool and the setting sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured grounds. "This is surreal," she said, settling into the chair beside me. 8 weeks ago I thought my career was over. Tonight, I'm celebrating the acquisition of my family's company by my little sister. How does that feel? I asked. Honestly, better than I expected. Victoria sipped her wine, considering her words carefully. For years, I felt this enormous pressure to live up to Dad's expectations, to be worthy of inheriting the company. Every decision felt like it could determine whether I was good enough to carry on the family legacy. She turned to look at me directly. But you've taken that pressure away. The company's future is secure. The employees are excited about growth opportunities. And I get to focus on what I'm actually good at, building client relationships, without worrying about whether I'm smart enough or strategic enough to run everything. You are smart enough, I said. You always were, but you were trying to be something you weren't instead of excelling at what you were. Maybe, or maybe I was just scared of admitting that I didn't have all the answers. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Rachel, can I tell you something I've never said before? Of course, I was jealous of you. From the time we were kids, you always seemed so sure of yourself, so focused on what you wanted. You didn't need anyone's approval to know you were capable. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of being the favorite, and you just were who you were. This was the conversation I'd imagined having with Victoria 1,000 times, but it felt different than I'd expected. Less satisfying as vindication, more meaningful as understanding. I wasn't sure of myself, I said. I was just stubborn. When everyone told me I wasn't good enough, I decided to prove them wrong instead of believing them. And now you own the company that told you that. Now I own a company that I plan to make better than it's ever been. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last few guests say their goodbyes in the parking lot below. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm proud of you, Rachel. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. What you've built is extraordinary, and what you're planning to build is even more impressive. Thank you, I said, and meant it. The following Monday morning, I walked into the Morrison and Associates building for the first time as its owner. The security guard nodded respectfully as I passed through the lobby, and employees who'd barely acknowledged me 6 years earlier greeted me warmly in the elevator. My new office was on the top floor, the corner suite that had been my father's for 23 years. I'd had it redecorated over the weekend, removing the heavy traditional furniture and replacing it with the modern, collaborative style that had worked so well at Phoenix Marketing Solutions. The wall behind my desk now displayed both companies' awards and achievements, creating a visual representation of our combined capabilities. At 9:00 a.m., I held my first official staff meeting as CEO of the combined organization. 56 employees gathered in the main conference room, representing every department and both legacy companies. The energy was electric, anticipation mixed with excitement about what came next. 6 months ago, I began. Morrison and Associates was struggling with declining revenue, and Phoenix Marketing Solutions was competing for the same clients from across town. Today, we're one company with complementary strengths and shared objectives. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, an organizational chart showing the new departmental structure. Our integration is complete, but our growth is just beginning. Over the next 12 months, we'll be opening offices in 3 new markets, launching specialized practice areas in healthcare and technology, and expanding our service offerings to include strategic consulting and brand development. The questions came rapidly: implementation timelines, staffing plans, technology investments, client development strategies. But these weren't worried questions about job security or organizational stability. These were growth questions from employees who saw opportunity instead of uncertainty. Jennifer Walsh raised her hand. Rachel, what about the Meridian Capital Partnership? How will that affect our day-to-day operations? I'd been waiting for someone to ask about the private equity partnership, which we'd announced the previous week. Meridian's investment will provide capital for expansion and additional acquisitions, but it won't change our operational approach or company culture. We'll maintain local control and decision-making autonomy while having access to resources that will accelerate our growth plan. Thomas Rivera followed up. Are we looking at specific acquisition targets? We're evaluating opportunities in digital advertising, public relations, and strategic consulting. The goal is to build a comprehensive marketing services platform that can compete with national agencies while maintaining our local market expertise. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day in individual conversations with department heads, reviewing growth plans and integration progress. The transformation from two separate companies into one cohesive organization had been smoother than anyone anticipated, partly because of careful planning, but mostly because everyone understood they were building something better together. That afternoon, Catherine Liu called with news that would reshape everything again. Rachel, I have a proposition that might interest you. We've been approached by Spectrum Media Group about a potential partnership opportunity. They're a national agency network, looking to establish regional hubs, and they've identified your combined organization as an ideal partner for the Midwest market. Spectrum Media Group was a major player, the kind of company that Morrison and Associates had always aspired to compete with, but never could. The partnership Catherine was describing would give us access to national clients and international campaign capabilities, while allowing us to maintain local control and ownership. What kind of partnership are we talking about? I asked. Equity investment, with operational autonomy. You'd retain majority control and CEO authority, but you'd have access to their client base, vendor relationships, and global capabilities. Think of it as franchise ownership for marketing agencies. The implications were staggering. In 18 months, I'd gone from being dismissed as not executive material to being courted by national agencies as a strategic partner. The business I'd built to prove my capabilities had become a platform for opportunities I'd never imagined. But with the excitement came a moment of reflection about what success actually meant. That evening, I sat in my new office after everyone else had gone home, looking at the framed photo on my desk, a picture of the Phoenix Marketing Solutions team from our first Christmas party 4 years earlier. 8 people gathered around a conference table in our original office, celebrating a successful year with takeout Chinese food and cheap champagne. Sarah Chen was in that photo, beaming with pride about a campaign that had won a local advertising award. Emily Rodriguez was there, fresh out of college and excited about her first real job in marketing. Jake Sullivan was holding up a printout of analytics data, showing record performance for one of our small business clients. Those people had believed in the vision when Phoenix Marketing Solutions was just an idea, when we were competing with agencies 10 times our size for clients who had never heard of us. They'd worked late nights and weekends, not because they had to, but because they wanted to build something meaningful. Now we had 56 employees, national partnership opportunities, and private equity backing. We had industry recognition, media coverage, and acquisition targets. We had everything I'd dreamed of when I left Morrison and Associates, with nothing but determination and a belief that I could do better. But sitting there in the corner office that had once belonged to my father, I realized that the real satisfaction wasn't in the size of the organization or the scope of the opportunity. It was in the phone call from David Chen, telling me that he felt secure in his job for the first time in years. It was in Sarah's promotion to creative director, and her growing confidence as a leader. It was in Victoria's quiet admission that she was happier focusing on client relationships than worrying about strategic management. Success wasn't about proving I was executive material. It was about becoming the kind of executive who created opportunities for other people to prove their own worth. The next morning, I called Catherine Liu back. I'm interested in the Spectrum Media Group partnership, I said, but I have some conditions. I'm listening. First, all current employees retain their positions and compensation levels. Second,
We maintain our collaborative culture and professional development programs. Third, any future acquisitions, prioritize employee retention and growth opportunities over cost savings. Catherine laughed. You're negotiating like someone who has options. I am someone who has options, I said, but more importantly, I'm someone who understands that good business is about more than just financial return. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the girl who'd been told she wasn't executive material had become exactly the kind of executive she'd needed when she was starting out, someone who valued substance over style, results over relationships, and people over profit margin. And that transformation, more than any acquisition or partnership or industry recognition, was the real measure of how far I'd come. 1 year later, I stood in front of 300 marketing professionals at the Regional Business Excellence Awards, holding a crystal trophy that read, Executive of the Year, Marketing Services category. The same industry that had overlooked me for 6 years was now celebrating my transformation of Morrison & Associates, and the creation of what trade publications were calling the most innovative agency partnership in the Midwest. But the real vindication wasn't the award or the recognition. It was the letter I'd received that morning from Jennifer Martinez, a junior account coordinator who'd started with us 3 months earlier. Dear Miss Morrison, it read, I wanted to thank you for something you probably don't even remember. During my interview, you told me that potential matters more than pedigree, and that you judge people by their work ethic and results rather than their educational background or connection. I graduated from community college, not an Ivy League school, and I've been told my whole career that I don't have the right background for marketing, but you saw something in me that other employers miss. For the first time in my professional life, I feel like I'm being evaluated on what I can do, not where I came from. That letter reminded me why the journey from dismissed daughter to industry leader had been worth every sleepless night and every moment of doubt. The Spectrum Media Group partnership had officially launched 6 months earlier, making our agency the regional hub for their Midwest operation. We now had access to Fortune 500 clients, international campaign capabilities, and resources that would have been unimaginable when I was sitting in that Morrison & Associates cubicle being told I lacked executive presence. But size wasn't the story I wanted to tell. The story was Emily Rodriguez, who'd joined Phoenix Marketing Solutions as a junior content strategist and was now creative director of our Chicago satellite office. The story was Thomas Rivera, who'd parlayed his data analytics expertise into a consulting role with 3 other agencies in our network. The story was David Chen, who'd survived the Morrison & Associates layoffs and was now our director of financial planning, building the budgeting systems that supported our multi-office operation. Most surprisingly, the story was about Victoria. My sister had not only adapted to her role as Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, she'd excelled in ways that surprised both of us. Freed from the pressure of running operations she'd never been passionate about, Victoria had focused on what she did best, building relationships and identifying opportunity. She'd brought in 4 major new clients in 8 months, and had become the public face of our business development efforts. 3 weeks earlier, she'd walked into my office with a proposal that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Rachel, I want to discuss opening a West Coast office, she'd said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the kind of confidence I remembered from our childhood. I've been developing relationships with technology companies in Seattle and San Francisco, and I think there's an opportunity to establish a specialized practice focused on innovation marketing. Her presentation was thorough, data-driven, and strategically sound. More importantly, it demonstrated the kind of entrepreneurial thinking that our father had always hoped to see from his successor. This would mean relocating to Seattle, I'd said, managing a startup operation with significant autonomy and responsibility. It would mean proving that a Morrison can build something from scratch, Victoria had replied. Just like you did. I'd approved the expansion proposal that afternoon, and Victoria was scheduled to move to Seattle in 6 weeks to launch our West Coast practice. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The sister who'd once dismissed my entrepreneurial instincts was now requesting the opportunity to start her own entrepreneurial venture within our organization. But the legacy I was most proud of wasn't measured in offices or revenue or industry recognition. It was measured in the culture we'd built and the people we'd developed. Sarah Chen had become everything I'd hoped she could be as creative director, but more importantly, she'd become a mentor to younger employees who reminded her of her earlier self. She'd instituted monthly creative development sessions, where junior team members could present ideas directly to senior leadership, ensuring that good thinking was recognized regardless of hierarchy or tenure. I remember what it felt like to have ideas dismissed because they came from someone without the right title, Sarah had told me when she'd proposed the program. I want to make sure that never happens here. Jake Sullivan had developed our internship program into something that recruited top talent from universities across the region. But instead of focusing exclusively on prestigious schools or traditional marketing majors, Jake sought out students who demonstrated creativity, work ethic, and strategic thinking regardless of their academic pedigree. We're looking for the next Rachel Morrison, he'd explained when I'd asked about his unconventional recruiting approach, someone who's hungry enough to outwork everyone else and smart enough to see opportunities that others miss. The program had been extraordinarily successful, both in terms of talent development and business results. Our intern-turned employees consistently outperformed new hires from traditional recruiting sources, partly because they understood our culture and partly because they felt genuine ownership in our success.
But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source, Marcus Henderson. Marcus had left Morrison and Associates during the acquisition transition, taking a position with Harrison Creative where he'd struggled to replicate the success he'd experienced in our more structured environment. 6 months after our acquisition closed, he'd called to request a meeting. "Rachel, I owe you an apology," he'd said when we met for coffee downtown. "When I got the creative director position at Morrison and Associates, I thought it was because I was the best candidate. I realize now that I was promoted because I fit their image of what leadership should look like, not because I had the skills to actually lead." Marcus had paused, choosing his words carefully. "Watching what you've built and how you've developed people has shown me the difference between real leadership and leadership theater. You create value. I was just performing a role." He'd asked if there might be opportunities to work with our agency on project basis, acknowledging that he'd learned more about effective management by observing our culture than he had in 2 years of MBA coursework. I'd agreed to bring him in as a freelance consultant for clients who specifically requested his aesthetic sensibilities, but under the creative direction of our permanent team. It was an arrangement that recognized his talents while maintaining our standards for collaborative leadership. The conversation with Marcus had crystallized something I'd been thinking about for months: the difference between earning authority and being granted authority. Victoria had been granted authority based on family relationships and traditional credentials. Marcus had been granted authority based on educational pedigree and presentation skills. Both had struggled when that authority wasn't supported by the expertise and judgment necessary to use it effectively. I had earned authority by building something from nothing, by making decisions that created value, by developing people who became more successful because of their association with our organization. The authority wasn't granted by others, it was created through results that spoke for themselves. That distinction had become the foundation of our leadership development philosophy across all our offices. We promoted people based on their ability to generate results and develop others, not based on their ability to project confidence or manage upward. We measured success by employee growth, client satisfaction, and business results, not by traditional metrics like tenure or degrees or networking capability. The approach had attracted attention from business schools and management consultants who wanted to study our unconventional promotion criteria. Harvard Business Review had published a case study about our employee development model, highlighting how we'd achieved industry-leading retention rates and performance metrics by focusing on substance over style. But the real test of our philosophy came when Meridian Capital Partners asked me to speak at their annual portfolio company conference about scaling organizational culture. The traditional approach to business leadership development focuses on identifying people who look like leaders and teaching them to lead. I told an audience of 200 CEOs and senior executives, but that approach assumes that leadership is about commanding authority rather than earning it. I clicked on a slide showing our employee satisfaction and business performance metrics compared to industry average. We found that the most effective leaders are often the people who were overlooked by traditional promotion criteria, the ones who had to prove themselves through results because they didn't have the right credentials or connection, the ones who understand that real leadership is about making other people successful, not about personal recognition. During the Q&A session afterward, a CEO from a tech company raised his hand. Morrison, this approach sounds idealistic, but how do you maintain standards when you're promoting people based on potential rather than proven track record? The proven track record is their work, I replied. We don't promote people based on potential, we promote them based on results they've already achieved. The difference is that we measure results by impact rather than visibility. Another audience member asked about scalability. Can this approach work for larger organizations with more complex hierarchies? Hierarchy isn't the problem, I said. The problem is when hierarchy becomes more important than competence, when people are more concerned about protecting their position than improving their performance. After the conference, 3 portfolio companies requested consulting engagements to help them implement similar leadership development approaches. Catherine Liu suggested that our organizational consulting practice could become another revenue stream for the agency. You've accidentally created a methodology that other companies want to replicate, she'd told me. There's definitely a market for this expertise, but scaling our approach to other organizations felt like missing the point. The value wasn't in the methodology. It was in the commitment to treating people as individuals with unique capabilities rather than as representatives of demographic categories or educational background. 6 months after the Spectrum partnership launch, I received a call that brought the journey full circle. Ms. Morrison, this is Angela Foster from Morrison Industries, the voice said. We're a manufacturing company based in Detroit, and we're looking for a marketing agency that understands our sector. Your name came up in several conversations, and we'd like to discuss working together. Morrison Industries had no connection to my family, but the coincidence of the name made me smile. When I researched the company, I discovered that they were exactly the kind of client that Morrison & Associates had always struggled to serve effectively, an established business in a traditional industry that needed digital transformation and strategic repositioning. The proposal process took 6 weeks, competing against 3 national agencies with significantly larger teams and resources. But we won the contract because we understood their business, respected their industry expertise, and developed solutions that addressed their specific challenges rather than applying generic strategy. The Morrison Industries campaign became a model for how traditional businesses could leverage digital marketing to reach new markets without losing their core identity. Harvard Business Review featured it as a case study in authentic brand evolution, and it won 5 industry awards, including the Grand Prize for Integrated Marketing Excellence. More importantly, it demonstrated that the skills I'd developed by being dismissed and overlooked, the ability to listen carefully, understand complex problems and develop solutions that others missed, had become the foundation for sustainable competitive. 1 year after winning the Morrison Industries account, I was invited to speak at the annual Marketing Leadership Summit, the same conference where Victoria had been a featured speaker for 3 consecutive years during her tenure at Morrison & Associates. Standing at the podium where my sister had once presented on building lasting client relationships through executive presence, I looked out at an audience of marketing executives, agency owners and industry leaders who were there to hear about unconventional paths to business success. 5 years ago, I was told by my family's marketing agency that I wasn't executive material. I began. The person who told me that was wrong about my potential, but she was right about one thing. I wasn't their kind of executive material. I paused, looking at faces in the audience who were leaning forward with interest. I was the kind of executive material that builds value instead of protecting status. That measures success by team development rather than personal recognition. That earns authority through results rather than demanding it through position. The presentation covered our journey from startup to acquisition to national partnership, but the focus wasn't on business strategy or financial metrics. It was on the people whose careers had been transformed because someone believed in their capabilities rather than their credentials. The most important lesson I've learned, I concluded, is that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you believe the people doing the underestimate. When you prove them wrong by building something they couldn't imagine, their opinion becomes irrelevant. The standing ovation lasted longer than I'd expected, but what mattered more were the conversations afterward. Young professionals who'd felt overlooked in their current organization, experienced executives who were questioning whether traditional leadership development was actually developing leaders, business owners who wanted to create cultures where talent was recognized regardless of packaging. But the conversation that mattered most came from someone I hadn't expected to see in the audience. "That was extraordinary," Victoria said, approaching me as the crowd began to thin. "I've been thinking about what you said about earning authority versus being granted it, and I realized that's exactly what happened when I moved to Seattle." Victoria's West Coast practice had exceeded all projections in its first year, landing technology clients who appreciated her relationship-building skills and strategic thinking. But more importantly, she'd built a team culture that reflected the lessons she'd learned about collaborative leadership. "For the first time in my career, I'm succeeding because of what I've built rather than what I've inherited," she said. "It feels completely different. When success is granted to you, you spend all your energy trying to prove you deserve it. When you earn it yourself, you spend your energy figuring out how to build more of it." As we walked toward the parking garage together, Victoria asked the question I'd been waiting 5 years to hear. "Rachel, what would you have done differently if you'd been promoted to creative director that day instead of Marcus?" I considered the question carefully. "I probably would have become a competent department head who implemented incremental improvements and maintained acceptable performance standards, but not the CEO of a multi-office agency with national partnerships. Being dismissed forced me to prove that I could build something from nothing. Being promoted would have required me to prove that I could manage something that already existed." Victoria smiled. "So in a way I did you a favor, in a way you did, but I wouldn't recommend that approach for everyone." We reached our cars, parked side by side in the executive section of the garage. Victoria paused before getting into her car. "Rachel, I want you to know that I'm proud to be part of what you've built. Not because you're my sister, but because you're the kind of leader I want to work for." Driving home that night, I thought about the letter from Jennifer Martinez that had started my day a year earlier. The young woman who'd been told she didn't have the right background for marketing success had just been promoted to senior account manager, becoming the youngest person in our company's history to reach that level. Her success wasn't unusual in our organization, it was the norm. We'd created an environment where people succeeded because of their capabilities, rather than their connections, their work ethic rather than their credentials, their potential rather than their pedigree. And maybe that, more than any acquisition or award or industry recognition, was the real measure of what it meant to be executive material, the ability to see potential that others miss and create opportunities for people to prove what they're capable of achieving. The daughter who'd been dismissed for lacking executive presence had become an executive who never dismissed anyone based on presence alone, and that transformation, from overlooked to opportunity creator, was a legacy worth building. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.